Keanu Reeves never expected a quiet walk with Buddy to turn into a life-threatening battle against cruelty. The day had started peacefully enough, the bustling John Wick film set alive with activity, but the unease had started brewing the moment they stepped away. Brooklyn Heights was vibrant in the early afternoon sun, the streets humming with life as vendors called out their wares and children laughed nearby. Yet the calm felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Keanu and Buddy, his trusted Pitbull co-star, meandered through the streets, seeking a moment of peace before returning to the set. "Let's get you some water, Buddy," Keanu murmured, crouching to ruffle the dog's ears. Buddy wagged his tail, his brown eyes reflecting trust and affection. For Keanu, this wasn't just a break. It was their time to connect. Buddy had been by his side during some of the loneliest months of filming, a constant source of comfort amidst the chaos. They found a small public fountain nestled at the corner of a quieter street. As Keanu filled Buddy's collapsible water bowl, he felt the first prick of unease. A low rumble of engines broke the stillness, and the faint laughter of men spilled out from a nearby bar. Iron and ash, its faded sign looming like a warning. Buddy drank eagerly, oblivious to the tension that was starting to gather in the air. Keanu, however, couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. He noticed the glint of chrome from a row of motorcycles lined up outside the bar, and more unsettling, the group of men lounging nearby. Leather vests, tattoos, and laughter laced with a dangerous edge painted a vivid picture. One of the men, a burly figure with a tiger emblem stitched onto his vest, stepped closer, his heavy boots echoing ominously against the pavement. His gaze settled on Buddy, a sneer curling across his lips. "Nice dog," the man said, his voice gravelly. "Pit bulls, they're loyal, tough, but you got to keep them in line. Otherwise—" He let the implication hang, his smirk widening. Keanu straightened, his hand instinctively tightening on Buddy's leash. "He's well behaved," Keanu replied evenly, his voice calm but edged with warning. The man's gaze lingered a moment longer before he chuckled, turning back to the bar. "Better keep it that way," he muttered. Keanu watched him go, a knot tightening in his stomach. He crouched beside Buddy again, stroking the dog's head as if to reassure them both. "Let's move on," he said softly, leading Buddy away from the fountain. The bar's presence loomed behind them, its darkened windows like watchful eyes. Keanu kept his steps measured, but his mind raced. Something about the encounter felt like the calm before a storm, the kind of tension that always preceded action in the movies. Buddy, oblivious to the undercurrents, trotted happily alongside him, his leash slack in Keanu's hand. But as they walked, the peaceful hum of the neighborhood seemed distant, replaced by a heavy silence. Even the laughter of children and the chatter of vendors felt muted. Their journey took them to a small park, where Keanu hoped to shake the unease that clung to him. He found a shaded bench beneath a sprawling oak tree and sat down, letting Buddy rest at his feet. "This'll be our spot for a bit," he said, his voice lighter now. Buddy lay down with a contented sigh, his tail thumping against the ground. For a moment the tension began to ease, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the park. But Keanu couldn't ignore the feeling that they weren't as far from trouble as they hoped. The sunlight grew harsher as Keanu and Buddy continued their walk, leaving the bustling streets for quieter corners of the neighborhood. The lively hum of Brooklyn Heights faded into a low, uneasy quiet. Buddy's panting grew heavier, and Keanu searched for another spot to rest. As they turned a corner, Keanu's steps faltered. The imposing structure of iron and ash came into view. The bar loomed ahead like a relic of a grittier time, its brick facade weathered, its faded sign hanging precariously above the entrance. Lined up outside were rows of motorcycles, their chrome accents gleaming in the harsh sunlight like polished weapons. Keanu's gaze swept over the scene. A group of bikers leaned casually against their bikes, their laughter carrying an edge that made the air feel heavier. Each wore the same emblem as the man from earlier, a snarling tiger, claws extended. Buddy tugged gently on the leash, drawing Keanu's attention to a nearby public water fountain. "You're thirsty, huh?" Keanu murmured, crouching to unpack Buddy's collapsible water bowl. As the dog drank, Keanu's ears picked up snippets of conversation from the bikers, a low, rumbling chorus of voices that never quite dipped into words but carried menace all the same. The sound of heavy boots against pavement drew Keanu's attention. One of the bikers, a broad-shouldered man with tattoos snaking up his arms, stepped away from the group and approached. His vest bore the same tiger emblem, stitched prominently across his chest. "Nice pit bull," the man said, his tone casual but laced with something colder. He looked Buddy up and down, his smirk widening. "They get a bad rap, but they're loyal, strong, just like us bikers." Keanu straightened, his hand tightening on Buddy's leash. "They're great companions," he replied evenly. The man chuckled, the sound rough like gravel under tires. "Yeah, if you know how to keep them in line. Not everyone can handle a dog like that." He let the words hang before turning back to his group, his laughter fading into theirs as he disappeared into the bar. Keanu let out a slow breath, the knot in his chest tightening. He crouched beside Buddy, running a hand over the dog's back as much to reassure himself as the pit bull. "Let's go," he said softly, his voice steady. As they moved away from the bar, Keanu's senses stayed sharp. The tension in the air clung to him like a second skin, his instincts urging him to stay alert. Buddy, oblivious to the danger, trotted happily beside him, his tail wagging faintly. Their walk took them to a small park, where Keanu hoped they could find a moment of peace. He chose a shaded bench beneath a sprawling oak tree and sat down, letting Buddy rest at his feet. The dog stretched out, his eyes half closed as he relaxed. But the reprieve was brief. The faint rumble of a motorcycle engine reached Keanu's ears, followed by the unmistakable sound of raised voices. He turned, his gaze snapping back to the direction of Iron and Ash. From the distance, he could make out a group of bikers gathered outside the bar. The waitress from earlier stood at the edge of the crowd, her posture defensive but firm. Even from afar, Keanu could hear the sharp edge in her voice. "I told you," she said, her words cutting through the quiet street. "You're not welcome here anymore. The boss made it clear." One of the bikers, the same man who had approached Keanu earlier, stepped forward. His movements were deliberate, his size towering over the waitress. "Move aside," he growled, his voice low and dangerous, "or we'll move you ourselves." Keanu's muscles tensed, his grip tightening on Buddy's leash. His instincts screamed at him to intervene, but he hesitated. This wasn't a film set. There were no rehearsed lines, no choreographed stunts. Just as the situation seemed ready to spiral out of control, the bar's door opened again. A second group of bikers emerged, their movements calm but purposeful. Their leader, a wiry man with sharp eyes, positioned himself between the waitress and her aggressors. "You heard her," the man said, his tone measured but unyielding. "Time for you to leave." For a long moment, the two groups stood in tense silence, the weight of their standoff pressing on the air. Then slowly, the aggressors backed down, their muttered curses barely audible as they retreated. Keanu let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The waitress, her shoulders still tense, turned to the group who had come to her aid, offering a small nod of gratitude before disappearing back inside. Keanu stood, leading Buddy away from the park. His steps were measured, but his thoughts churned. The tension from Iron and Ash wasn't just lingering, it was growing. As he glanced down at Buddy, the dog looked up at him, his eyes bright and trusting. Keanu smiled faintly, his resolve hardening. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The park's serene atmosphere was a stark contrast to the tension that clung to Keanu like a shadow. He sat on the bench under the oak tree, his gaze flickering between Buddy, who rested at his feet, and the distant outline of Iron and Ash. The earlier confrontation with the biker replayed in his mind, the man's cryptic words lingering like a bad omen. "Just a quiet day, right, Buddy?" Keanu murmured, his tone light but betraying a hint of unease. Buddy's tail thumped against the ground, his contented expression a reminder of the trust the dog placed in him. For a moment, the tension seemed to fade. Then the peace shattered. A sharp, deliberate voice cut through the ambient noise of the park. "Control your dog." Startled, Keanu turned to see a burly man striding toward them. The tiger insignia on his vest gleamed in the sunlight, and his expression was a twisted mask of disdain. It was the same man from Iron and Ash. Buddy sat up, his ears pricking as he let out a low growl. Keanu rose slowly, placing himself between the dog and the biker. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The biker sneered, his gaze locked on Buddy. "Yeah, there's a problem. Animals like that don't belong here." Without warning, the man's boot lashed out, striking Buddy in the side. The pit bull yelped, stumbling backward before recovering his stance. His growl deepened, and his body tensed. Keanu's fury ignited, his composure slipping as he stepped forward. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice edged with steel. The biker laughed, a harsh sound that grated against Keanu's ears. "Keep that mutt in line, or someone else will." His tone was loaded with menace, his smirk daring Keanu to react. Keanu's fists clenched at his sides. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't the time or place for a fight. "You don't touch my dog," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Ever." The biker took a step closer, his smirk widening. "Or what? You gonna teach me a lesson, Hollywood?" Keanu's jaw tightened, his mind racing. Buddy was watching him, his trust unwavering despite the pain he had just endured. Keanu knew he couldn't let anger dictate his actions, not with Buddy's safety at stake. "I'm walking away," Keanu said, his tone controlled. He turned, tugging gently on Buddy's leash to lead him away. "Coward!" the biker spat, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby parkgoers. "Just like your mutt." Keanu paused but didn't turn back. He kept walking, his grip on Buddy's leash firm. The biker's laughter echoed behind him, a sound that burned into Keanu's memory. As they left the park, Keanu knelt beside Buddy, running his hands over the dog's side. "You okay, Buddy?" he asked softly. Buddy's tail wagged faintly, and he nuzzled into Keanu's touch. The simple gesture grounded Keanu, reminding him of what truly mattered. The encounter replayed in his mind as they walked, the biker's words gnawing at him. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of threat, nor the realization that Iron and Ash's influence extended far beyond its walls. These weren't just petty bullies. They were a coordinated menace. Keanu spotted a small cafe with outdoor seating and decided to stop. The patio was shaded by string lights and potted plants, offering a much-needed reprieve. He guided Buddy to a corner table, helping him settle into the chair beside him. "Let's take a break," Keanu said, his voice soft. The waiter approached and Keanu ordered a coffee and a steak sandwich, along with an unsalted portion of steak for Buddy. As they waited for their food, Keanu pulled out his phone, scrolling through his messages. A text from the director caught his eye. "All set for the afternoon shoot?" Keanu hesitated before replying. "We'll be there. Just need a little time." The thought of returning to the set felt distant compared to the immediate danger that seemed to shadow them. When the food arrived, Buddy perked up, his tail wagging as the plate was set before him. Keanu chuckled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "You're easy to please, huh?" he said, cutting up the steak into smaller pieces for the dog. Buddy ate enthusiastically, his earlier distress fading as he enjoyed the meal. Keanu watched him, a small smile forming on his lips. Despite everything, Buddy's resilience shone through. It was a reminder of why he couldn't back down, not for himself, but for the dog who trusted him implicitly. The calm of the cafe was broken when Keanu's phone buzzed with a call. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Frowning, he answered. "Hello?" "Mr. Reeves," a gruff voice said. "You're in over your head. Leave Iron and Ash alone, or next time, it won't just be your dog." The line went dead. Keanu stared at the phone, his grip tightening. The threat was clear, and the stakes had just been raised. He glanced at Buddy, who looked up at him with trusting eyes. Keanu's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about defending himself. It was about protecting Buddy and standing up to the kind of cruelty that had no place in the world. As they left the cafe, Keanu's mind raced. He couldn't ignore the threat any longer. The bikers from Iron and Ash weren't just bullies. They were dangerous. And if they thought they could intimidate him, they were wrong. "Let's get back to the set," Keanu said, his voice steady. Buddy wagged his tail, his trust unwavering. Together, they headed into the afternoon sun, ready to face whatever came next. The sun dipped lower in the sky as Keanu and Buddy arrived back at the film set. The chaos of the day had left its mark on both of them. Buddy's usually energetic demeanor was subdued, and Keanu's mind churned with the weight of what had happened. But the familiarity of the set offered a fleeting sense of normalcy. Keanu handed Buddy's leash to the dog keeper, who greeted the pit bull with a warm smile. "He seems tired," the dog keeper observed, crouching to pat Buddy's head. "He's had a rough day," Keanu replied, his voice tight with restrained emotion. He hesitated for a moment before adding, Keep a close eye on him for me. I'll check in soon. The crew buzzed around the set, preparing for the next scene. But Keanu's focus was elsewhere. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Sheriff Hank Morrison. Need details ASAP. Iron and ash is on our radar. Keanu stepped away from the bustle of the set, his hands shaking slightly as he typed out a reply. It's more than troublemakers. They're dangerous. Sent a threat. Poison my dog. He hit send, his jaw tightening as he stared at the screen. The reply came quickly. Stay safe. We're mobilizing. Keanu slipped his phone back into his pocket, his thoughts racing. The threat was no longer abstract. It was personal. Buddy's whimper at the cafe, the deliberate cruelty of the biker, and the callous warning over the phone all pointed to the same conclusion. The bikers wouldn't stop until they were stopped. Despite his mounting frustration, Keanu knew he couldn't act rashly. He returned to the set, throwing himself into his work as a distraction. The director called for a few solo shots, and Keanu moved through his lines with precision, his focus sharpening with each take. But as the cameras rolled, his thoughts drifted back to Buddy. The dog's unwavering loyalty had been a constant source of comfort during the chaos of filming. Keanu remembered their first meeting, how Buddy had trotted up to him on set, his tail wagging and his eyes filled with curiosity. In that moment, Keanu had known they were kindred spirits. Between takes, Keanu checked in with the dog keeper, who reassured him that Buddy was resting comfortably. Still, the pit bull's absence left an ache that Keanu couldn't ignore. Later that evening, as the crew wrapped up for the day, Keanu retrieved Buddy and decided to take him for a short walk. The streets of Brooklyn Heights were quieter now, the earlier tension replaced by a hushed calm. Buddy walked beside him, his energy slowly returning as he sniffed at lampposts and patches of grass. They reached a small, secluded park, a familiar spot where they often retreated to escape the demands of the set. Keanu sat on a bench, motioning for Buddy to hop up beside him. The pit bull obliged, resting his head on Keanu's lap. You've been through a lot today, huh? Keanu murmured, stroking Buddy's fur. The dog's tail wagged faintly, his eyes closing as he relaxed under Keanu's touch. Keanu's thoughts drifted to the events of the day. The confrontation at the park, the threat over the phone, and the bikers' escalating hostility. He couldn't shake the feeling that their actions were part of something larger, something more dangerous than a few cruel individuals. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Keanu's phone buzzed again. It was Hank. We're moving on iron and ash tonight. Stay clear. Keanu stared at the message, his emotions warring between relief and unease. Justice was within reach, but the biker's parting words echoed in his mind. Next time, it won't just be your dog. He glanced down at Buddy, who looked up at him with trusting eyes. I'll keep you safe, Keanu promised softly, no matter what. The hours passed in quiet reflection, the rhythmic sound of Buddy's breathing grounding Keanu. The bond they shared was unspoken but deeply felt, a connection forged through trust, loyalty, and a shared resilience. As the city lights began to twinkle, Keanu decided it was time to head back to the hotel. Buddy trotted alongside him, his steps steadier now. The pit bull's resilience was a reminder of why Keanu couldn't back down, why he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. When they reached the hotel room, Buddy curled up on his bed, letting out a contented sigh. Keanu watched him for a moment, his chest tightening with a mix of love and gratitude. You're tougher than any of them, he said quietly. Keanu settled into his own bed, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind replayed the events of the day in vivid detail. The biker's sneer, Buddy's yelp, and the menace in the voice on the phone. But beneath the anger and frustration was a deep resolve. He wouldn't let the biker's cruelty define the narrative. The next morning, Keanu woke early, his mind clearer than it had been in days. Buddy greeted him with a wagging tail and an eager bark, his energy fully restored. Keanu knelt beside him, ruffling his fur. Ready for another day, Buddy? Buddy responded with a playful nudge, his eyes bright with affection. Keanu smiled, the heaviness in his chest lifting. Together, they faced the new day with renewed determination. The fight wasn't over, but they weren't alone, and that made all the difference. The quiet hum of the morning was deceptive, masking the storm that was about to unfold. Keanu had just stepped out of the hotel with Buddy, intending to take him for a light walk before heading to the set. The pit bull trotted alongside him, his energy renewed after a night of rest, but the peace shattered within moments. As they reached a quiet intersection, Buddy suddenly stumbled, his gait faltering. A sharp whimper escaped him, and he collapsed onto his side, his chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic breaths. Keanu dropped to his knees, his heart pounding. "Buddy? Hey, what's wrong?" His voice trembled as he gently cradled the dog's head. Buddy's eyes flickered, his tail giving a faint wag before going still. Fear surged through Keanu as realization struck. The bikers, the poisoned sausage, the threat. This wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. His mind raced, but his actions were instinctive. Scooping Buddy into his arms, he sprinted down the street, the weight of the pit bull insignificant compared to the gravity of the moment. "Hang on, Buddy," Keanu whispered, his voice breaking. "You're going to be okay. I promise." The streets of Brooklyn Heights blurred around him. Passers-by turned to stare, some stepping aside to clear a path, their faces etched with concern. Keanu's focus remained unshaken, his gaze fixed on the faint blue cross of the veterinary clinic in the distance. Every step felt like a battle against time. Buddy's breath grew weaker, his body limp against Keanu's chest. The knot of fear tightened in Keanu's chest, but he pushed forward, fueled by sheer determination. He burst through the clinic doors, his voice urgent. "I need help. My dog's been poisoned." The receptionist, startled but quick to act, called for assistance. Moments later, a woman in scrubs appeared, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos Keanu felt. Her name tag read, Dr. Harper. "Bring him here," she instructed, leading Keanu to an examination room. He carefully placed Buddy on the cold metal table, his hands lingering on the dog's fur. "He ate something at a cafe yesterday," Keanu explained, his words tumbling out. "Then this morning, he collapsed." Dr. Harper nodded, her movements swift and deliberate as she examined Buddy. "We'll start with activated charcoal and IV fluids," she said, her tone professional but tinged with urgency. She turned to the nurse. "Run blood tests immediately. Prepare antidotes for common toxins." Keanu watched as they worked, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He felt powerless, the weight of guilt and anger pressing down on him. As Dr. Harper injected the antidote, she glanced at Keanu. "We'll do everything we can," she said firmly. Keanu was ushered into the waiting room, the sterile smell of the clinic doing little to calm his nerves. He sat with his head in his hands, his thoughts spiraling. The biker's words rang in his ears. "Next time, it won't just be your dog." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Keanu's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his haze. It was the director. "Keanu?" The director's voice was a mix of concern and urgency. "Where are you? We're waiting on set." Keanu explained the situation succinctly, his voice tight with emotion. The director paused before replying, his tone softening. "Take care of Buddy. We'll adjust the schedule." The call ended, leaving Keanu alone with his thoughts once more. His mind raced back to the bikers, their smug expressions, their callous cruelty. The weight of their threat was undeniable now, and the stakes were higher than ever. Finally, Dr. Harper emerged, her face calm but serious. Keanu stood immediately, his heart pounding. "How is he?" "He's stable for now," she said. "The tests confirmed traces of toxins, rat poison specifically, mixed with narcotics. We've administered the antidote and fluids. He's responding well, but the next 24 hours will be critical." Keanu exhaled slowly, relief washing over him even as the gravity of her words settled in. "What happens now?" Dr. Harper's expression softened. "We'll keep him here for observation. He's a fighter, but he'll need rest and continued care." Keanu nodded, his resolve hardening. "Thank you. Do whatever it takes." After checking on Buddy one last time, Keanu stepped outside, the crisp morning air hitting him like a wave. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sheriff Hank Morrison. "Hank," he said, his voice steady. "They crossed a line. They poisoned my dog. This isn't just intimidation anymore." Hank's tone was firm. "I hear you, Keanu. We've already got a team mobilizing. Stay put and don't engage." Keanu ended the call, his grip tightening on the phone. The thought of sitting idly while the bikers roamed free churned his stomach. But he knew Hank was right. Buddy's recovery came first. As the sun climbed higher, Keanu returned to the waiting room, his thoughts focused solely on Buddy. The bond they shared, the trust and loyalty that had carried them through so much, was what kept him grounded. By the time the clinic staff assured him Buddy was resting comfortably, Keanu allowed himself a small moment of hope. They had survived the day's worst challenge, but he knew the battle wasn't over. Looking out at the city skyline, Keanu made a silent promise. He would see this through, for Buddy and for everyone who had ever faced cruelty at the hands of those who thought they were untouchable. The city lights cast an eerie glow as Keanu stepped out of the clinic. The weight of the day pressed heavily on him, but a new resolve burned in his chest. Buddy was stable, but the biker's threat had escalated beyond intimidation. It was an act of calculated cruelty. They had to be stopped. Keanu pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed Sheriff Hank Morrison. The line connected after just one ring. "Hank," Keanu said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "They poisoned Buddy. It wasn't random. They knew what they were doing." Hank's tone was calm but sharp. "Keanu, I've got a team ready to move on Iron and Ash tonight. You've given us what we need. Just stay out of it. Let us handle this." Keanu hesitated, his mind flashing back to the biker's sneer and the smug tone of the phone threat. "They're dangerous, Hank," he said. "Be careful." "We know," Hank replied, "but don't make this personal. Let us do our job." Keanu ended the call, his jaw tightening. As much as he trusted Hank, sitting idle wasn't an option. The bikers had turned this into a battle, and Keanu wasn't one to back down from protecting those he cared about. He headed toward Iron and Ash, his steps deliberate but measured. The bar loomed ahead, its brick facade dark and foreboding under the streetlights. The familiar row of motorcycles glinted in the faint light, but the area seemed quieter than before. Keanu positioned himself across the street, blending into the shadows. His phone was ready in his hand, its camera trained on the bar. Through the cracked blinds of a window, he could see movement. Figures gesturing animatedly, their laughter carrying a cruel edge. The door swung open, and a group of bikers stepped out, their leather vests marked with the snarling tiger emblem. They lingered near their bikes, their voices low and conspiratorial. Keanu hit record, capturing every detail, their faces, their patches, the casual menace in their demeanor. The door opened again, and the burly man from the park emerged, his presence as imposing as ever. He lit a cigarette, his eyes scanning the street before turning back to his group. "We'll deal with it tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying just enough for Keanu to catch. "No loose ends." Keanu's grip on his phone tightened. Threat wasn't over. They were planning something more. Just as he considered moving closer, the faint sound of sirens broke through the stillness. Keanu stepped further into the shadows as squad cars approached, their lights flashing but silent. Officers poured out, their movements precise and coordinated as they surrounded the bar. Keanu watched as the bikers froze, their bravado giving way to confusion and panic. The officers moved swiftly, issuing commands and securing the area. One by one, the bikers were cuffed and led away, their faces a mix of anger and disbelief. The burly man resisted, his voice rising in defiance. "You've got nothing on us," he snarled, his eyes darting toward the squad car where Hank stood. Hank stepped forward, his tone calm but authoritative. "We have enough. Poisoning a dog is just the tip of the iceberg." The man's eyes flicked briefly to the shadows where Keanu stood before he was forced into the car. For a moment, their gazes met, anger and defeat in one, quiet resolve in the other. Keanu stayed hidden until the scene cleared. When the last squad car pulled away, he emerged, his chest tight with a mix of relief and lingering tension. Justice had been served, but the impact of the bikers' actions still lingered. The walk back to the clinic was quieter than before. Keanu's mind churned with the events of the night, the bikers' downfall, the momentary victory, but his thoughts always circled back to Buddy. When he arrived, Dr. Harper greeted him with a warm smile. "Buddy's doing well," she said. "He's resting, but his vitals are strong." Keanu followed her to the treatment area, his steps lighter now. Buddy lay curled on a soft bed, his tail wagging faintly as Keanu approached. "Hey, Buddy," Keanu murmured, crouching to stroke the dog's fur. Buddy nuzzled into his hand, his trust and affection unwavering. Dr. Harper watched the reunion with a soft smile. "He's lucky to have you," she said. Keanu shook his head, his voice quiet. "I'm the lucky one." He spent the next hour beside Buddy, tension of the day melting away with every wag of the pit bull's tail. As the city settled into quiet, Keanu made a silent promise to Buddy and himself. This wasn't just about one victory. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As he left the clinic that night, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Justice had been served, but more importantly, Buddy was safe, and that was all that mattered. The sun was rising over Brooklyn Heights, casting soft golden light across the city. The streets, still quiet from the night's events, felt lighter, as though a dark cloud had lifted. For the first time in days, Keanu allowed himself to breathe. The clinic was quiet when he returned to check on Buddy. Dr. Harper greeted him with a warm smile, her expression softer than it had been the night before. "Good morning," she said. "Buddy's made excellent progress overnight. His vitals are stable, and he's eating well. You can take him home today." Relief flooded Keanu, and a small smile broke across his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Dr. Harper led him to the treatment area, where Buddy was resting on a soft bed. The moment Buddy saw Keanu, his tail began wagging enthusiastically, and he let out a joyful bark. Keanu knelt beside him, gently scratching behind his ears. "Hey, Buddy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're tougher than anyone I know." Buddy responded with a happy nuzzle, leaning into Keanu's touch. The bond between them, forged through trust and resilience, was palpable. After final instructions from Dr. Harper, medication schedules, a special diet, and follow-up appointments, Keanu carried Buddy outside. The crisp morning air greeted them as they stepped into the sunlight, a stark contrast to the tension of the previous day. The walk back to the hotel was unhurried. Buddy trotted confidently at Keanu's side, his tail wagging as he sniffed at every corner. Keanu watched him with a mix of pride and gratitude, the weight of the past few days slowly lifting. When they arrived at the film set later that morning, the crew erupted into applause. Word of Buddy's ordeal and recovery had spread, and their genuine concern brought warmth to Keanu's heart. Maggie, the waitress from the cafe, stood nearby, holding a bag filled with toys and treats for Buddy. "You're the real star here," Maggie said with a grin as she knelt to pet Buddy. The pit bull wagged his tail, leaning into her affection. Keanu chuckled, the corners of his mouth lifting into a rare smile. "He's definitely earned it." The director approached, clapping Keanu on the shoulder. "Glad to see you both back," he said. "We've adjusted the schedule to give Buddy time to ease back into things. No rush." "Thanks," Keanu replied. "He's tougher than he looks, but I think he'll appreciate that." As the day unfolded, Keanu and Buddy slipped seamlessly back into their roles. Their first scene together since Buddy's recovery was electric, the bond they had forged off-screen translating effortlessly into their performance. When the director called "cut," the crew erupted into applause. "That was incredible," the director said, grinning. "The connection between you two, it's something else." Later that evening, as the set grew quiet and the crew dispersed, Keanu found himself sitting with Buddy near the edge of the lot. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the city's skyline silhouetted against the fading light. Buddy rested his head on Keanu's lap, his breathing steady and calm. Keanu stroked his fur, his gaze distant as he reflected on the events of the past few days. "You know, Buddy," he said softly, "when this all started, I thought it was just about making the film better. But it's so much more than that now." Buddy looked up at him, his tail thumping against the ground. "You've taught me a lot," Keanu continued, "about loyalty, about strength, and about never giving up." The dog let out a soft woof, leaning further into Keanu's touch. As the city lights began to twinkle, Keanu felt a deep sense of gratitude. The biker's threat had been neutralized, and Buddy had come out of the ordeal stronger. But more than that, the experience had reminded Keanu of the importance of standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. When they returned to the hotel that night, Buddy curled up on his bed near the window, letting out a contented sigh. Keanu watched him for a moment, his chest tightening with affection. You're not just a co-star, he said quietly. You're family. With that, Keanu settled into his own bed, the weight of the past days finally lifting. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he and Buddy would face it together. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Brooklyn Heights skyline in soft hues of orange and pink. Keanu and Buddy walked along the waterfront, the gentle sound of waves lapping against the shore, providing a soothing backdrop. The chaos of the past few days felt distant now, replaced by a calm that came not from resolution, but from resilience. Buddy trotted confidently at Keanu's side, his tail wagging as he sniffed at every new scent. Despite everything he had endured, the pit bull carried himself with a quiet strength, as if the weight of the ordeal had only made him stronger. Keanu glanced down at Buddy, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're a fighter," he said softly. "You've always been one, haven't you?" The bond they shared felt deeper now, built not just on trust but on survival and mutual care. Keanu's mind drifted back to their first meeting. Buddy had bounded onto the set, full of energy and curiosity, instantly charming everyone in sight. But it was the way he had looked at Keanu, with unflinching loyalty, that had sealed their connection. They reached a bench overlooking the water, and Keanu motioned for Buddy to hop up beside him. The dog obliged, resting his head on Keanu's lap. Together they watched the city lights flicker to life, reflecting on the rippling surface of the water. "You know," Keanu began, his voice quiet but steady, "when this started, I thought it was about making the film better, about bonding for the scenes." He paused, his hand absently stroking Buddy's fur. "But it's so much more than that now. You've taught me something I didn't even know I needed to learn." Buddy's ears perked up slightly, his tail giving a faint wag. "You've taught me about loyalty," Keanu continued, "about what it means to stand by someone, no matter what, and about courage, the kind that doesn't come from facing danger, but from enduring it." The dog let out a soft huff, his eyes closing as he nestled closer to Keanu. Keanu's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Sheriff Hank. "Bikers processed. Iron and Ash officially shut down. Your footage was critical. Thank you." He stared at the message, a wave of satisfaction washing over him. Justice had been served, and the bikers' reign of intimidation was over. But more importantly, the streets of Brooklyn Heights, and Buddy, were safe. He placed his phone back in his pocket, his gaze returning to the water. "We did it, Buddy," he said softly. "Together." Buddy responded with a wag of his tail, his trust in Keanu as unwavering as ever. The next morning, the set buzzed with a renewed energy. Word of Buddy's recovery and the resolution of the Iron and Ash ordeal had spread, and the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in days. Crew members greeted Keanu and Buddy warmly, their smiles genuine. As they prepared for their next scene, Maggie arrived with another bag of treats and toys. "You're becoming quite the celebrity, Buddy," she teased, crouching to pet the pit bull. Buddy wagged his tail, leaning into her affection. Keanu chuckled, watching the interaction with quiet pride. "He's earned it," he said simply. The director approached, clapping Keanu on the shoulder. "Ready to work your magic again?" he asked. Keanu glanced at Buddy, who was now standing alert and ready. "Always," he replied with a smile. As the cameras rolled, Keanu and Buddy slipped effortlessly into their roles. Their shared experience off-screen brought a depth to their performance that couldn't be faked. The bond they displayed on camera was as real as it got, captivating everyone on set. When the director called cut, the crew erupted into applause. "That was incredible," the director said, his excitement evident. "You two are unstoppable." Later that evening, Keanu and Buddy returned to their favorite spot at the park. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, the city's twinkling lights creating a serene backdrop. Keanu sat on their usual bench, Buddy at his side. The pit bull rested his head on Keanu's lap, his breathing steady and calm. Keanu stroked his fur, his gaze distant as he reflected on their journey. "You've been through so much," Keanu murmured, his voice filled with quiet emotion. "But you never gave up. And because of you, I didn't either." Buddy's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and his tail thumped lightly against the bench. Keanu smiled, the warmth of the moment settling over him. "You're not just a co-star, Buddy. You're family, and I'm lucky to have you." As the night deepened, Keanu and Buddy lingered, content in the quiet. The challenges they had faced together had tested their limits, but they had come out stronger. Their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a testament to loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between two souls who had faced the odds and emerged victorious. And as Keanu gazed out at the city lights, Buddy snuggled close beside him. He knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they would face it together.